Murray.
Okay, I hit record. So we can
I
talk.
heard the woman.
You heard the woman, and she's so much nicer. Thank you, Zoom, for changing the woman's voice to be much less aggressive.
I am
You were
quite sure
recording.
they changed it because they were tired of hearing all of our Dialogue Doctor fans complain because you have to talk about how aggressive her voice is.
Yeah, they were like, could you please change it so Jeff will stop talking about how aggressive her voice is? And we're like, yeah, of course. Okay, welcome to the Dialogue Doctor podcast vlog. I don't know what to call our YouTube thing. Podcast video cast thing on the YouTube.
How about our YouTube podcast?
Oh, is that a thing? I don't know if that's a thing. It's a thing.
It's a thing now.
Yeah, and let me just say, before we even start, happy birthday to me. It was my birthday. And this is all about me. That's all this is about. It's all about me. Okay, so anyway, let's get started with the let's get started with what's going on in the Dialogue Doctor world.
I think we need a theme song. Yeah. I mean, I know you have one at the beginning of your podcast.
I have a kickoff song of the podcast.
I feel like we need one like the 80s theme songs where there's like music and we can like.
I have started to sing the phrase "all that to say" whenever I catch myself saying it.
I mean, you do say it a lot.
I do. So maybe it could be something where like we're just singing all that to say.
No, I mean, no.
No? Okay.
If any of our podcast listeners know how to write like a good theme song, I'm talking like Gilligan's Island type theme song. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows the words. That's what we need. Somebody write that for us, please.
Somebody write that for us, and Laura will sing it.
Laura is tone deaf. Like literally 2% of the population.
We'll get Wendy to sing it. We'll get my wife to sing it.
Yeah.
She's a musician. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's get serious. Now I want to sing that too.
I just want to sing Let's Get Physical.
Let's get serious. Okay, come on. Dang it. We're so distracted already. We're only 1 minute in and we haven't talked about anything important. Okay, let's get through all the administrative stuff. And then we can
did
get
talk
to
about something important. We talked about your birthday.
Oh, it's all about me.
How was your cake?
Birthday. We're saving it for tonight. Laura made me a fantastic cake and brought it over last night.
Can't say it's fantastic if you haven't eaten it yet.
It's beautiful. It's beautifully decorated. It's
chocolate cake.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. But we're saving it for tonight. I haven't cut into it yet.
I don't know how you've had a cake in your house for that long and not cut into it.
I am a model of self-restraint. That is completely untrue. I was just too tired last night we talked for 2 hours last night in the parking lot. If you guys haven't picked up on this on the podcast or the video yet, Laura and I are always together.
Usually together on Zoom, but sometimes
always talking. We're always talking. We've already talked today for 2 hours. We talked last night for 2 hours, and then we did a session yesterday morning for 2 hours.
We did a session this afternoon for 2 hours. Well, I guess that was the 2 hours.
That was what I was 2 hours of talking. Yeah. So already it's not even including work on Friday. Not even including that.
Yeah.
This weekend we've already logged 8 hours together.
You're so lucky. You could just spend
I'm so lucky. I get to hang out with Laura all day. Unfortunately for Laura, everyone understands why she's going insane.
I will say that Jason is very happy when I'm like, I got to go do Dialogue Doctor. He's like, oh, thank you. You're not going to talk to me for 2 hours.
I get to go away. Yeah. Jason is Laura's husband. Okay. Come on, serious time. All right. So let's get serious. All right. So let's talk about what's happening in the Dialogue Doctor community. We're rebooting the book club. We named a book back in the spring. And then I got distracted because my kid was going to college and I got all emotional. I stopped reading all things and I just started reading garbage that made me feel good. So we're going back, but he's at college now. He's doing fine. So we're rebooting
doing better
the book
than
club.
Fine. He's thriving.
He's actually rocking it out.
He he's played some kind of golf and something else.
He's trying all kinds of new things. He's doing racquetball. He's actually attending his classes. He's doing his homework. He texts his mother all the time. Not me. Not me. I don't know why I'm saying that like I'm
I
offended. He
heard
doesn't
there was a
listen to
surprise
this.
birthday call though.
There was. I got a surprise call, a Zoom call on my birthday, which was very nice. This is all about me and my birthday. Yeah. So anyway, it was. He's doing really well at college, but I got emotionally distracted, so I just stopped reading stuff. So we're picking back up Freaky Deaky, and we're going to read the book. If you want to be a part of the book club, we're going to record that on Monday, September 27th. So
8 p.m. Eastern.
8 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to be a part of that recording and you've read the book, the only requirement to coming to book club is that you've read the book. You don't have to talk.
And
you just sit on the camera, because really I'll talk the whole time.
And
So,
really, like, you only have to read the first half of the book.
That is not true. Don't say that. You have to read the whole book. And I will say, I have read Freaky Deaky now, and it is man, it's a stunning example. I'm actually really excited to talk about the mechanics of Freaky Deaky. There are some things that are dated in the book that make me sad. We have to stop picking
very
books.
sad attitudes.
We have to stop picking books with horrible attitudes of people. But there are the mechanics of dialogue in the book are amazing. So I'm very excited to talk about that. So September 27th, if you want to be on that podcast to talk about Freaky Deaky, this is our book club. It's the Dialogue Doctor Community's book club. So just email us and come join us and the Slack crew for doing that book club. Second thing, speaking of the Slack crew, if you're not part of the Dialogue Doctor experience, the Dialogue Doctor experience starts on Monday with this podcast, but then it continues all week long. On Tuesday, all week. So on Tuesdays, a newsletter comes out Tuesday morning that will expand on something we talk about on the podcast. And this Tuesday in the newsletter, I'm actually going to post some videos that help you navigate the free tools that we shared last week. So sign up for the newsletter. If you don't get the newsletter, you don't get to navigate the free tools we shared. You're just lost in my bad coding. So Tuesday newsletter, Wednesday a bonus episode comes out. You have to subscribe to the Patreon to get the bonus episode. The bonus episode people, they've already gotten run-throughs. They got to watch me fill out both charts for like an hour and talk about why I did things with the charts and how they work. So bonus episode, $3 a month, super cheap. It's less than a Big Mac.
I was gonna say it's cheaper than coffee.
Cheaper than coffee. Let's see, Joanna Penn uses that example, and I feel like if I continue to rip her off, at some point she's going to be angry and cancel me. She's just going to be like, Jeff is done in the author world. You? She's the queen. She can do it. So, so it's bow at the feet of Joanna Penn. So
cheaper than a gallon of gas.
Cheaper than a gallon of gas, depending on where you live.
I mean, I feel like everywhere it's like over $3.
And what are you going to do if you're buying 1 gallon of gas a month? You're not going anywhere anyway. So it's cheaper than a gallon of gas a month. So sign up for the bonus episode on the Patreon. There's a link in the newsletter. So you can sign up for the newsletter and then read the newsletter. And at the bottom of the newsletter, there's a link to the Patreon on the bonus episode. And then you can sign on to the bonus episode. And if you sign on the bonus episode, you become a part of the Slack group. And on Tuesdays, the Slack group does a writing prompt together. So that on Thursdays, we can get Laura's marvelous editing prompt, which is the real point of the writing prompt, is to get the editing prompt. And then on Friday, we post our edited work together. So that is the Dialogue
say that
Doctor.
Like the editing prompt isn't important.
No, I say like the editing prompt is the most important thing.
I mean that the writing prompt isn't important. If we didn't have the writing prompt, we wouldn't have the editing prompt. Like what would we edit if we didn't have a writing edit?
I don't feel like you need the writing prompt or an editing prompt. Anyway, that's not important. What is important is that you know the Dialogue Doctor experience. Tuesday newsletter, Wednesday bonus episode, Tuesday writing prompt, Thursday the fabulous editing prompt, and then Slack all week round. So that is, and the Slack also has Zoom calls, which I know, guys, I haven't done one for a month, but we're going to start back this September, where we read a short story together, we do a character wheel together, we do something together to kind of hone our skills. You get to be on those too once a month. So that is the Dialogue Doctor experience. Sign up for that. Today, Laura and I are going to demonstrate a new, well, it's not a new thing. We've actually been doing it since January, but since we first published the character wheel chart, we've been working on this skill. And it's evolved with how we do it with authors, but we've been talking about character wheel charts, which we're now calling character voice charts, and how they work together and how we put them together since then. And we've been doing this thing with authors where we build their cast with them. So the author gives us a story, and
by gives us a story, we don't mean like a book that's already been written or even a chapter that's already been written. They just tell us their ideas for what they want to write.
Yeah, they tell us like, this is what I'm going for. This is the kind of story I want to write. This is where it's going. And then they talk to us about their characters. And then what we do is we spend 90 minutes hammering out their character personality and their character voices so that they can create characters that will set their story up for success. That's what we do. And yeah, you can find that on the website under services, cast building, if you want to read more about it. But today I have a book cranking around in my head that now that the Vela project that I'm writing with JP Rindfleisch is moving forward, this is a book that I want to start spending some more time on. It's called Riley and Mark. And so I'm going to pitch it to Laura as if I'm an author. And then Laura and I are going to do what we do when we're cast building, which has a specific series of steps, a specific focus in what we do. So that is the goal. Anything to say about that before we get started?
No.
Okay. I've been talking a lot, and I'm like talking for some reason like rapid pace.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about this.
Down,
I mean, we can just do it and show it, but I feel like we always talk about things before we do it and show it.
We do.
So this is a service that we offer because we talk about voice all the time on this podcast. We talk about cadence and pacing and words and dialogue and how they make up voice and how they're using the dialogue daisy. They're tied to character background and personality. And we offer a 4-hour course on thinking through how your character's background and personality affect their voice. And yet walking away from this conference after 4 hours of hearing Jeff and me talk and giving examples and showing from literature like how we dissect voices in the same way that we do the podcast of a movie that a lot of people have seen, and we create character wheels. But we get a lot of feedback from writers saying, well, that's great that you can make a character wheel from something that already exists, but how do I create a character wheel, a character voice chart now, based off of a story that I just had in my head? How do I really think about this? So after the first conference in June, we actually we paired it with the conference. So if you took the conference, you got a 90-minute session with us where we really just dissected, and people seem to really like it.
I think it's helpful because it gives you a new way to think about your story. So we have all these plot devices where we like use these plot devices to build our story, right? Like there's Story Grid, and there's Save the Cat, and there's the more classical like 3-act story, 5-act story, 7-act story. And when I first started writing, I'm kind of obsessed with learning systems, and so I got real obsessed with plot. I love a good system. I love a good system. And I love the right tools to work that system. I need both of those things to make me happy.
Because you worked for a blacksmith for 9 months.
I wasn't going to say it. I wasn't going to say it.
You always say it.
I wasn't going to say it.
You wanted to. You thought about it.
I actually didn't. I thought about it.
You thought about it.
Yeah. So, but I love a good system. So I obsessed learning all of the systems that I could get my hands on. Currently, I'm using the 3-story method by Jay Thorne and Zach Bohan. Thanks, Jay and Zach. Because I think it's the most flexible, efficient, and strong story diagnosis story system. So all that to say, there's a different way to think about story. So what those systems do is they look at the high level of the story. And they say like, okay, here's the high level of the story. Here's what I want to talk about. Here are the beats of that story that I need. Now let me kind of take my character and plug them into those beats and figure out how the character can meet each beat, which is all great. But for me as a writer, then I'd be like, okay, so now I need to write a scene. And with every single one of those things, there's a disconnect between like, I have this beat and I have this scene. And what do I do? And Jay and Zach's 3-story method actually does a great job of breaking that down, because they say have a conflict, some choices, and a consequence, which is really good. There's an additional way to think about this, though, that really helps me write, in addition to that, which is, and sometimes actually inspires better story for me, which is every story, like we just talked about, is a system of scenes, right? A story is a multi-celled organism. It's a system of scenes that it's a living thing of scenes that your reader is going to experience one cell at a time. Why are you smiling at me? Laura's giving me a weird look. That's what it is.
Because you take something as beautiful as a novel and a story, and I see it as a series of emotional events. And you're like, it's an organism and there are cells.
That's right.
And
you're going to live in each cell for a minute. But we're thinking about the monastic version of cells, which is a little closed room with no windows and just a bed and a chair, a cell. I guess that in modern day, that's the prison. We are off the rails already.
Okay. Too late. We've been off the rails since we
started off the rails. See, professional podcasters would stop this and start over, but not us. We're going to forge ahead. Because
I feel like our community appreciates the realism that we bring. I don't know that we've ever gotten any feedback about that, because we all know that I don't know how to check the comments as it relates to podcasts. So if you have something to say about the realism of our podcast, send us an email, because otherwise I don't see your feedback.
We don't know what we're doing. Okay, so let me try to get back to the beauty. So a story is a series of scenes, right? Like that's what a story is. It's one scene after the other. And like Laura was saying, each of those scenes is an emotional moment that you're taking your reader through. Those emotional moments are actually comprised of a character talking to other characters or to the world around them. So every scene is a conversation that conveys emotion. So when we're thinking about like a scene is like choice, a conflict, choice, and consequences, what we're thinking about is a conversation in which there's a conflict, and then there are choices that the character has to make, and then there is a consequence to those choices, whether that be in a conversation with other characters or whether that be in a conversation with the world around them. But if I think of it as a conversation, it's super helpful. And this is where character voice plays in, because I know I can make those conversations work and engaging and readable and something that is going to sustain a reader through the whole book if my character voices complement and contrast with one another in a way that sets up the conflicts. So I can generate conflict with conflicting character voices. Does that make sense? And if I can generate a series of conflicts with contrasting character voices, then I have a story. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you my Pixar pitch for a novel that I'm kind of ruminating about. That I actually have it outlined a little bit, but we won't go into the full outline. And then I'm going to talk to you about my two characters and what I'm hoping for those characters. And then we're going to build their voices together. The words they use, the body language they use, the cadence that they have, and the pacing that they use. And from that, you're going to see how, by building the voices, we can enhance this story, this series of scenes that we have. There's a fly.
I know. I keep seeing it.
Crazy. Go away. Okay. So
a little bit of a reminder of the vice presidential debate.
Yeah, I know. There's a fly on my face.
Also, I don't know if it's your internet or my internet.
Like being compared to Pence. Yeah.
I didn't compare you to Pence. I compared the fly to the all consuming fly.
I'm already self-conscious about my evangelical roots. I don't want to be compared to that. So. Anyway, sorry.
No, I was just saying that I don't know if it's your internet or mine, but something keeps sputtering. So for our viewers, listeners, however you're getting us into your ears, we apologize for.
I have no sputter, but my camera does shake because it's on my desk. I bounce my foot a lot, and when I bounce my foot, my desk shakes, which makes it feel like I'm in an earthquake all the time.
I know.
I know.
I know.
I'm not playing with Legos today. That's good. There's not a loud clinking behind me at all.
That's okay, because I've got my trusty binder clip here and I
Yes.
keep clicking on it and I keep remembering how annoying it is to hear
I actually
that
have my
switch
fidget
quiet.
cube today that you bought me 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
Or 5 years ago.
I didn't buy it, and I'm not sure it was 6 years ago. Jason ordered
Jason bought
like
it for me.
12 of them off of
Yeah.
Kickstarter.
For
So I
me.
had to give them away because you can't have 12 cubes in my house.
But
I have one somewhere, but
they
I
were
think
all
they're-
bought for me. That was the point of the
Yes.
story. Because it's all about me. Birthday. Okay. Pixar pitch
Is
for my
that a
story.
real song, or did you make that song up? Not that you making a song up isn't a real song.
Speaking of my evangelical roots, it is actually a praise and worship song. It's all about you, Jesus. And I've changed the words to be about my birthday, which I'm sure is radical. And old evangelical Jeff would tell me I'm going to hell for that.
I feel like we're going to get a lot of letters about that. Not that anybody actually writes a letter, I guess an email or a comment. I'm so old.
We just lost like 200 listeners because Jeff has offended their religious sensibilities. This is what happens when Laura and Jeff spend 8 hours on a weekend together and then try to do a podcast. Pixar pitch. We're going to the Pixar pitch. Okay.
Pixar pitch.
So if you don't know what a Pixar pitch is, you can Google it. It's an easy way. It's how Pixar writes their stories. It's an easy way to like convey your story into a couple sentences. And the way the Pixar pitch goes, once upon a time, blank, every day, blank, one day, blank, because of that, blank, because of that, blank, until finally, blank. So here's my Mark and Riley Pixar pitch.
Okay.
Once upon a time, in a world that had just recovered from a pandemic, Mark.
Where'd you get the inspiration for that?
I don't know. Because I write what I know.
I'm totally kidding. I know where you got it.
My Pixar pitch.
Is Mark the same Mark in your story collection of Marks?
Yeah. Because I write short stories first.
Okay.
So this is Mark on the toilet and Mark with the cigar.
Great. I just wanted to make sure, because otherwise I think we need to get you a book of names, because if all of your characters.
You do need to give me a book of names, because I'm always like, what's the name of this character? I'm like, Joe. And then somebody's like, can you pick a more exciting name? But I've actually had readers write me and be like, hey, can you pick more exciting names?
Yes. You've also had editors going, I don't understand why this character's name keeps changing from scene to scene.
That's why we build charts now, Laura. That's what inspired. That's actually one of the things that inspired the character cast voice chart that we're about to talk about, is because Jeff couldn't remember how to spell his characters' names. So we had to have a chart.
What their names were.
Yeah. And if you want to look through the chart we're talking through, we're not actually bringing one up. We're just doing this in our head, because we've done this so many times over the years that we can
see it in our sleep.
Just see it in our sleep. But if you want to go to look at what we're talking through, go look at the character voice chart on the free tools page of the dialoguedoctor.com. It's there. You can just click it. It's a Google sheet.
I feel like you could probably put them in the notes, the podcast notes, right?
Yeah, I can do that.
Do you know how to do that?
I do.
I don't know how to read the comments, so I don't know if you know how to. Okay. All right. So I
put links in the books. Once upon a time in a post-pandemic world, Mark was struggling with anger issues, and Riley was struggling with fear of re-entering the world. Every day, Riley worked from home and refused to leave her apartment. Her fears, and I'm going to do what writers do to us, which is like give us way too much backstory. Her fears inspired me by the fact that her dad died during the pandemic. So she doesn't want to come out again because she's afraid that she's going to get whatever.
Did her dad die of the pandemic?
Her dad died of the pandemic. Yeah.
Okay.
So she stays at home every day, and she only comes out of her house when her brother, who's a priest, forces her to come out and deal with something that has to do with her dad's death. That's the only time she's been out of her house post-pandemic. Every day, Mark goes to work at his comic book shop in which he yells at all of his customers and is generally a grumpy, cussing mess. That's Mark. So one day, I should add another part through the everyday. Every day, Mark and Riley get mystic messages from an unknown source, challenging them to change themselves and overcome their wound. But they are both effectively ignoring said messages. One day, Mark's therapist demands that for Mark to overcome his anger issues, he has to adopt someone else and try to help them. So while delivering comic books to Riley, Mark decides that he and Riley will go on a treasure hunt together that has been put into one of Mark's comic books. So Mark and Riley are going to go on a treasure hunt together. Because of this, they are forced to deal with their issues with one another, Mark's anger at the world and Riley's fear of being around. And because of that, they form a bond and start a relationship until finally they find peace and resolution in the world together, leaning on one another's strengths, and allowing each other's strengths to overcome their weaknesses.
Excellent. This is a beautiful story. I love it. Question about the plot.
Oh.
Riley.
How did I write something so perfect? How did I write such a perfect Pixar pitch?
How did you know that was going to be my question?
Well, I mean, what other question is there possibly asked? That's the only question that could possibly be asked.
This is something that we're faced with a lot as writers, right? It doesn't matter if we're a new writer or it's a writer that who's been writing for years and years and years.
Yeah.
We get an idea in our head about the way a story is supposed to go, and we share it with somebody else. And the first thing they do is go, but wait a minute, why this? Why that? How does this work together? So being open to like looking at opportunities in your story to make it better or stronger is one of the things that we definitely encourage at Dialogue Doctor, because as a reader, that one thing that doesn't make sense to us can ruin the emotional connection we have to an otherwise amazing storyline.
Yeah.
So my question for you, Jeff,
Can I guess what it is? Can I guess what it is?
Yeah.
Why in the hell is there a treasure hunt in the middle of this?
No, I actually love that. I think that's amazing.
Okay. That's where I'm struggling.
No, my question is, how is Mark going to convince Riley to leave the house for this treasure hunt?
Oh yeah, our question is the same. I was just summarizing the question in general, like how in the hell are you going to get a treasure hunt to happen in the middle of this? The answer is I don't know. And so like playing off, if I were to take my author hat off for a minute and put my Dialogue Doctor hat on and talk about, like if somebody had pitched me that story, just building on what you said, I would have been like, okay, the beautiful thing in this story, the thing that readers are going to come along the journey for is there's a guy experiencing rage and there's a woman experiencing deep fear. And there's an external force helping them deal with that, a magical force helping them deal with that. I want to see those characters transform. I want to see where they start and where they go. I want to see angry Mark find peace through helping someone else. I want to see terrified Riley find, solace in who she is, with having someone defend her and having someone speak for her in her fear, right? So having somebody take up for her, whether they agree with her fear or not, right? Like, so that's the piece of the story that I want. So if an author had pitched that to me, I would have been like, hey, getting a agoraphobic on a treasure hunt doesn't make sense. We do need to get her out of the house, but how does that work?
So actually, I think a treasure hunt is a fantastic way to do it, but the treasure hunt has to start online.
Yeah.
And the connection has to start online. Also, I'm not buying that Mark's in therapy unless but you have this mystical person giving mystical thing. We don't even know.
It's just a force. It's just a weird force. Yeah.
Sure. Which at some point during your story, you're actually going to have to explain. because as a reader, I'm going to be really mad if I get to the end of the story and don't know.
I know. I got really mad at Mark Zuckuckus in his first book when I got to the end of the story and the thing sending magical letters to the character was never really explained well.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah. And as a dialogue coach, I'm also going to make you include the voice of the messenger in your character chart and create a voice for it as well, because it's such an important element in your story. And obviously, when I say make you, I am going to strongly encourage you that is a voice on your chart.
I'm going to take control of your chart on Google Sheets, and I'm just going to do
when
it for you.
Sign up to work for the Dialogue Doctor. We come in and we take over.
And then I'm going to call your house every day, and I'm going to be like, hey, did you put the messenger voice into your book today?
All right. Well, first of all, we know I'm not calling anybody because the telephone terrifies me. I might send you a text message. I will probably send you an email. Probably not every day, because communicating with other people. Again, I'm a dialogue coach, and it's all because I don't want to talk to actual real people until I know them.
Yeah. So, but going back to what you're saying, if we have these three voices, like when we're talking about story construction in general, we have three voices. We've got a rage-filled, cussing Mark. We've got a terrified, hesitant Riley. And then we have this voice, which I would actually define as playfully cruel. Because for me, because I can't help but bend literary and magical at the same time, I can't help it. For me, the voice is actually kind of a comment on divinity and the role of belief in divinity in our lives. So that's, I'm kind of playing off the whole, like, is there a plan? What is the plan? What is happening with the plan? So I define the voice as playfully cruel, and that the voice is playful and bringing up messages in weird places. Like one of the scenes I've already written, because I wrote it as a short story, is Mark is sitting on his toilet because for a while there's a magical bathroom tile that allows him to see moments of his life from the past from a different perspective. So he's like obsessed over that. And then there's a scene where he gets candy hearts that are giving him messages while he's on a subway train, right? Like it's weird stuff. There's a stuffed bear at one point that runs up to him and hands him things. But so it's playful, but it's also cruel because it really does force him in a hard way to look at himself. Riley's voice does the same thing. It's this playful delivering. She sees scenes in the comic books she likes to read that
have she's seen
scenes in the comic books that she likes to read that directly speak to what's happening in her life. She gets fake text messages from her boss that send her spiraling, that force her to actually go into work one day. And then as she's at work, her boss is like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to see you. I can't believe that you came in. I thought you'd be remote forever. And Riley's like, well, you told me to come in. And Riley's like, I didn't tell you anything. And so Riley looks at her phone and the text messages are gone, right? Like, so it's that kind of like playful, yet a little like, cruel isn't the right word. I don't even know what you'd call that. Forceful?
So which voice do you want to start with? Do you want to start with the voice that's sharing the information, or do you want to start with Riley or Mark?
Let's start. I know Mark the best. I'm still discovering Riley.
Okay.
The messenger voice is probably too esoteric to start with.
Okay. So let's start with Mark.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about Mark's background.
So Mark owns this comic book store that almost closed during the pandemic. And the only way he kept it open was he hired this kid that lives down the street from him to start doing deliveries. He way underpays the kid, but inspired by things like DoorDash, he was like, well, we'll deliver comics to your house if you buy them from the store the day of. So like you can buy a comic and that day you're going to get it. And he has a partner in the store who puts all the comics online. So Mark is kind of like if he were in the store alone, it would have closed because he didn't do anything. His like friends and partners saved him through the pandemic.
Okay. Is he lazy, or why isn't he doing anything?
He is self-absorbed and helpless. So Mark spins. He gets mad and he spins about something, and the spinning leads him to inaction. Okay. So he's really fueled by his anger. So when the pandemic hit, he got really angry and really obsessed with the news and couldn't stop spinning about things.
Okay. Was he angry before the pandemic?
Yes. Anger is a consistent problem for him. And he ruined the one great relationship he had with his anger because he felt like she wasn't spending enough time with him. So he started spinning on his anger and punishing her for not spending enough time with him. And so he ruined that relationship. You know, he's ruined stuff with his anger in the past.
What's his relationship like with his business partner?
They have a loving toleration for him. So they've known him for a very long time. They've been friends since they were teenagers. They have this Mark is in his 40s. They have this long-standing relationship with him. And so they kind of see the beauty in his like desire for the world to be right. That's part of what makes him angry, is that things are broken in the world. He just can't handle it. So they are very much his kind of like tolerant rock and steady. And they don't take any of his crap, which is a reason the relationship works.
Okay. So you've got this character, Mark, who is relatively unsuccessful. It has an inability to, he gets in his own way a lot.
He's super self-destructive.
Yeah. Okay. What is it about this character that we as the reader like or find endearing? And I know you know this already, but for our audience who hasn't ever heard us do this, as a reader, we are connecting to the story in an emotional way. We have to want to read and invest our lives in a character's life. There has to be something that we want. If we create a character who's angry and aggressive and self-sabotages and pushes everybody around him away, it's very difficult as a reader to want to continue turning pages if we don't have some sort of connection. So
if the reader says about your character, this guy's an asshole, and there's nothing that's like, but I want to watch him because of blank, then like they're not getting several chapters in your book.
Right. So what is it about Mark that is connecting the reader to him?
Yeah, so Mark has he has a recognition that he has a problem. So we're not meeting Mark at the beginning of this problem. We're meeting him after he's destroyed his own relationship. We're meeting him after he's almost lost his business. So we're meeting a more mature Mark who understands there's a need for change. So when we meet Mark, he's pretty quick to apologize.
Okay.
He spins out and he apologizes quickly.
Okay. Who is Mark talking to say that he needs this change? Is it his therapist?
I don't know. He's in the scenes that I've written, he's talking to his partner.
His business
partner. Yeah.
Okay.
They are constantly pushing him to, like, there's a scene I wrote, for example, where a customer comes in not wearing a mask, and Mark gets really angry, even though Mark doesn't have a mask on, because Mark had just put a sign on the door that says you have to wear a mask. So Mark starts yelling at the customer for not wearing a mask. And the customer points out that Mark is not wearing a mask. So then Mark starts yelling about, how dare you judge me? And then the customer is like, I can't believe you're treating me this way. This is the worst store ever. And Mark starts yelling at the customer about how he probably doesn't even like comics. He probably doesn't even write comics. Why are you even here? We don't even want you. You're probably buying something for someone else. And that's when the partner steps in and is like, yeah, hey, Mark. And then Mark's like, I'm sorry. It's been a hard day. Let me put my mask on. I apologize. So we've got like a Mark who's in the process of change, which I'm hoping makes him connectable.
Okay, so that scene aside, I do have notes about that scene, but that scene
You're like,
aside,
there's so many problems. Jeff, nobody wants to read about the pandemic while it's
okay,
still going on.
well,
I know.
there is a question that I have about whether or not people want to read about the pandemic, but that's
Y'all,
neither
if
here
y'all
nor
are
there, because
new
I just
to the
finished
Dialogue
reading a
Doctor,
book
and
that was set in the pandemic. But
yeah.
wait,
let me just say, if y'all are new to the Dialogue Doctor and you don't know this about Jeff, Jeff writes plots that no one wants to read. All right, keep going.
Not true.
It's 100%
That is
true.
not true. I like your thoughts. Okay, so this idea that Mark wants to change, allows us to make him endearing. It allows us as the reader to want to connect. I would recommend that you either use the friend or the therapist as the one he's being vulnerable with. I can make an argument either way for whether it's the friend or whether it's the therapist. But honestly, it's probably the therapist. But either way, that person needs to consistently be the voice, and we need to see early in the story Mark having a confessional moment about how he wants things to be different in his life. That will make him endearing to us as the reader right from the start.
Yeah,
you got to do that early on. As for the scene that you're talking about with the customer, I love the premise of the scene. As you're describing the argument, it becomes unbalanced and unrealistic very quickly. You walk into a place, you get yelled at for not wearing your mask. You point out that the other person isn't wearing your mask. They yell at you. You're turning around and leaving and buying your comic online.
it's true.
So the story, there has to be a catch. Mark starts to yell, the partner steps in and immediately is like, hey, we have masks right here behind the counter. Mark is putting one on too.
Yeah,
right?
that would work better. They start to intercede right away. Yeah, that would be better.
So we have this thing as writers, as we see this scene unfold and there's this huge argument, but really in most cases in real life, somebody's just going to leave, because a lot of times people aren't going to subject themselves to that kind of anger and scrutiny, especially not right after a pandemic, right? So like thinking through that scene itself about knowing like, and if you're creating the partner as the character who's going to be resolving Mark's problems all the time, allowing him, or excuse me, partners them to like step in quickly, then allows you to have them talk to Mark in a safe way. Mark says something like, fine, I'll just go work in the back. And then the next scene, or the bridge to the scene, is the partner walking in the back and is like, you want to talk about that? And Mark can say, I'm just tired of all of this, and you should have had my back, and like whatever else it is that Mark says.
Yeah, and I don't know that I want their relationship to be that verbal. I may end up just taking that scene out altogether. Because I want them to be, so, and this is something that you and I talk about with authors all the time, which is like, what role is this side character or this ally playing in your lead character's transformation? And so I want the friend, Chris, to be consistently offering Mark a life that he is not taking advantage of. So I don't know that I actually want, I think making the therapist Mark's like confidant and voice of reason is going to be better than making the friend the voice of reason. So I may just remove that scene altogether.
I mean, you can leave the scene, and that scene can be the catalyst that Mark talks about in his next therapy session.
Yeah, I might do that.
I mean,
that would be good.
That scene is, if you're going to write a book about the pandemic, you have to have a mask scene in it, right? Like,
yeah, I've got a couple, because there's also a mask scene from Riley's perspective.
Okay.
And yeah, what it's like for her.
All right. So let's actually start talking about Mark's voice now that we have a little bit about background. What we didn't do is talk specifically about Mark's personality. Typically we'd say things like, well, Mark is self-absorbed. Mark
yeah, I would say real quickly, I would say that Mark's personality is explosive, is unyielding in like one way, and is self-absorbed, and is but in Mark has this other side to him in which he realizes that he has a problem. And so as explosive as he is with anger, he is equally as quick to turn to apologetic. But it's not a true apologetic, it's a forced apologetic.
Right. Yeah. So I would not use the word apologetic in his personality at all. I would use begrudging.
Yes, begrudging is a much better word.
So again, for those of you who are listening, Jeff, you've probably heard Jeff and I talk about like the specificity of language that we use. And the reason why we're such sticklers for that is because the understanding of the personality of your character translates directly into how your scene is planned, written, and edited. So knowing that when Mark understands that he's wrong, he's begrudging in his next response means that sometimes he's going to apologize. Sometimes he's going to just grumble and walk away without necessarily an apology. But the minute that you use the word apologetic, especially for you as a writer, Jeff, who has a main character, Tuck, in a different story,
who is truly apologetic. He apologizes for everything.
So like those two elements in juxtaposition with them. Now, if we were working with a new writer and I didn't know their other characters, I might not have needed to say that, okay, it's not apologetic, it's begrudging. But knowing that you have another character, and when you use the word apologetic, Tuck's personality is what comes to mind. You can't then use apologetic for.
Can't turn around and use it somewhere else too.
Right. Yeah. Especially in such a different context. So it's really the begrudging, which also, even if we didn't have Tuck in a different story, I would not use the word apologetic with angry, because they're too far separated from one another. You need to keep your personality notes consistent. It's like saying that somebody is very detail oriented and very big picture at the same time. Yeah. You can't be both. You're one or the other. Yeah. Right. Like, and if you really want them to have the ability to be able to do both, you focus on their ability to be in the middle and look to both ends. Right. Yeah. Like, so this is where the words that we use become really important as we're creating the character voice.
And the reason this kind of conversation is super helpful to me as an author is because now I have that word, begrudging. Mark's apologies are begrudging. So when I go to write a scene in which I know that he's going to have to explode and then apologize, the voice will be shaped by that word. I don't need to necessarily, we're going to hammer out words and cadence and pacing and all that in a second, and that's super helpful as well. But for me as a writer, just having that language, like, okay, begrudging puts me into the voice so that I can get the voice like that. That's the goal. It also, hammering out what the voices sound like, what the personality sounds like in this way, ensures that you're going to have a diverse voice cast, that like all of your characters aren't going to sound the same. Your characters are going to feel different, and their emotional journeys are going to be different, which is so important, right? Like Mark needs to have a radically different emotional journey from Riley. So if I use the word begrudging to describe an aspect of Mark's journey, and I can describe Riley's journey in a different way, then I know that when I write these scenes, I have a better chance of giving the reader a more colorful palette of emotional experience. Yeah.
Excellent. It also allows you to create a really nice transformation for Mark, because Mark isn't going to go from angry and begrudging at the start of the story to happy and loving at the end of the story. He's going to go from explosive and begrudging to irritated and sincere at the end of the story, right? Because when people change, they change slowly over time. And we as the reader need to buy the change.
Yeah. And sincere is definitely what I'm going for at the end of the book. Sincere and vulnerable is what I want from Mark, which is a step. I'm going to defend it.
Go ahead.
A step because rage is a form of vulnerability. It's an unintentional vulnerability. Whereas I want Mark to keep that vulnerability, but have it more measured, like you were saying. So I think the authenticity of anger and the authenticity of vulnerability create a step-like motion there.
Okay, so you've just revealed something about your character that's really important, is that Mark becomes enraged when he feels vulnerable.
Yes.
That is a really important element for you as the writer to know, and for us as the coaches to talk about, because there's anger, especially explosive anger, that can happen for any reason. So like in the situation where the customer comes in with a mask on, Mark getting angry because he's afraid of getting COVID or whatever pandemic you have going on, right? Like that makes sense. But if Mark is yelling at somebody over the phone for no reason because they are describing the opportunities for delivery options, right? Like if he starts screaming at them, he's just an asshole, right? Like knowing that the anger is associated with vulnerability, it also changes how we modulate Mark's voice, because the explosive anger shows up in those situations where he feels scared or vulnerable, but his baseline voice isn't angry, it's just agitated. He remains self-absorbed when we think about his voice notes, but he's not going around screaming at everybody all the time. And that's an important thing that we have to think about when we're writing characters, is sometimes we get a picture of a character in our head. In this case, the way you're describing Mark in the beginning, I was thinking you've got just this rage monster who's yelling all the time, which is very difficult as a reader to connect.
Nobody wants to read that.
Right? Like we like to see it once in a while, right? Like think about the Hulk. We love
it's a
Hulk.
Funny side character.
Right.
But a character that's running around yelling all the time is a great catalyst for like a main voice to deal with, but not a great main voice that you have to follow around all day.
Right. Okay. So let's talk details about his voice now that we've got his personality down. So his voice, he is self-absorbed, which means the topics that he's going to talk about, topics falls underneath of words. We break words down into word choice, and which I think I'm going to start calling vocabulary. And
I like that.
Vocabulary and topics make up words.
And so let's take a big overview. When we talk about a character voice, we have words, which are topics and vocabulary, body language, cadence, which is how they talk, the rhythm of their voice, and then pacing, which is when they talk in connection to other people. Sorry, I just wanted to give that big overview.
Perfect. Okay, so he is always going to talk about himself. He doesn't always have to use the word I, but everything is going to be about his perspective. He's never going to ask questions about other people, not how are they feeling or what do you want, which is going to be really interesting when he is working with customers, because when a customer comes up, it's never going to be about like, how can I help you? It's like, what do you need from me? Right.
Yeah, he's very, I don't know if you've one of the things that first formed the like, I was reading High Fidelity, and there's a character in High Fidelity who works in a record store, but actually hates interacting with customers. He just works in the record store so that he can listen to records all day.
Right.
And that's where I got this aspect of Mark, was like, he works in a comic book store so he can read comics all day. He
Right.
doesn't actually want to deal with any customers.
Right.
Yeah.
So like a customer comes up and puts a comic on the counter and he's talking about how his favorite comic is something else and you should try it because it's really better than this. Right.
Yeah.
Like his aggression and his agitation is preventing him from connecting with people.
Yeah. Using the phrase
level.
like, why would anybody buy this garbage? Right. Like there's so much fatter ones out there. And you're still like, don't you want to sell me?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that like unintentionally offending people is going to happen for him a lot, because he's so self-absorbed that he ends up diminishing the people around him without him even knowing it.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the words that he uses, he's in his 40s. So he grew up in the era before, like with encyclopedias. So likely his language is going to be a little bit more formal, but his vocabulary is going to be a little bit more formal, but he does work in a comic book store. So like the topics he talks about are going to be much more, juvenile's not the right word. But it's like less serious.
Yes, less important.
Inconsequential.
Yeah, he's really caught up into whether Man Beast and Starfish are going to live out their next battle. Like that's very important to him. Yeah.
Right. So so his vocabulary can be in that, like, he doesn't always have to find the most intense way of talking about something. He can be very casual in his language. That's probably the word that I want, casual. In his language.
Casual is a good way to put it.
So when you're talking about his body language, people who have this sense of anger and aggression, especially when anger and aggression is a response to vulnerability, tend to be very physically protective of themselves.
Yeah.
So you want to, as you're talking about him, you want to use a lot of language about him stepping away from other people, or putting space between them, or ensuring that when there's a customer there, the counter is between them and the customer. When he's talking to his business partner, there's a table between them, or he's standing on the other side of boxes. He's using physical objects to separate himself from other people because he has that fear of that vulnerability. And like physical space is a way that one can protect themselves. When he's angry, and this is when we start getting into modulation, I would recommend that you use his physical body to express that anger. Clenched fists, tightened jaws. Maybe he like pushes things out of the way. Maybe he works in a comic book store, so maybe he has like one of those like rubber Nerf balls that when he starts to get anxious, he throws against the wall.
Yeah.
Right? Like something where he can physically manifest his anger and his frustration without fear of hurting anyone else.
And as you're talking about that, I really kind of like the idea that like at some point somebody's given him like a squishy toy that he's supposed to squeeze when he gets angry. So he just grabs and it's just like squeezing the crap out of that thing. I like the like comedic visual of that. Yeah. Especially if it squeaks. That would be great. Yeah.
There you go. As far as his pacing goes, so again, pacing comes in about we have a tendency, as we're talking about it in new writers thinking about pacing, we have a tendency to think about it's like how fast or slow someone talks. But pacing actually has nothing to do with how the words come out of your mouth. That's cadence. Pacing is all about when. When does that character speak in relation to other characters? Mark is self-absorbed. So Mark is going to speak when Mark wants to speak, which means if he's talking to a customer, he's not going to speak until he's absolutely pressed into speech, which means he's going to be one of the last people in a scene to speak. But when Mark is feeling vulnerable and angry, he's going to speak first, and he's going to demand that other people listen to him, which means he's going to have no problem cutting other people off. He's going to interrupt a lot. He's going to demand that people listen to him. And if he's angry, he's going to get the last word most of the time by storming off. Whether or not somebody else wants to speak is inconsequential to him. He's going to walk away.
Yeah.
Which can also be like going back to precision and technicality. Walking away actually comes into body language, not into, but it's actually an element of body language that I would only put in an anger modulation.
Yeah.
If we were looking at the chart, I wouldn't put that in the general voice notes. The last part of voice that we haven't talked about is cadence, and this is how the words come out of his mouth. You've, again, created him with this idea that he is self-absorbed and self-sabotaging. As a self-sabotager, he's likely in his head a lot.
Yeah.
And if he's in his head a lot, even though he's dominating the conversation, he's going to take a lot of pauses. He's often going to like think before he speaks, with the exception of when he's in anger, and then the words are just going to kind of spill out of his mouth.
I wanted to go the other way with him.
Okay.
I wanted to go with him where he thinks out loud and has verbal diarrhea, which is part of what gets him into trouble all the time.
Okay.
It's part of the reason that he's self-sabotaging, is because he just says everything all the time.
Okay. So then you're still going to do the thing where you're putting the dialogue tags in the middle of sentences because he's thinking out loud. You just don't want to put anything at the beginning because it shows that he starts talking before he thinks.
Yeah, I want that like eruption of words where he's just like has like a long sentence and then a dialogue tag and then like another couple long sentences that are all run on with lots of commas.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So it feels like a verbal expulsion of stuff where like he's taking breaths in between, but not long enough to let anybody else get a word in edgewise until he's done. Like you were saying, he speaks when he wants to speak. He's not really aware of other people around him. So he like explodes and then he's done. And then I'll probably end his paragraph with like some form of body language that shows that he's cutting everyone else off around.
So that's great when his modulation is angry. You want to think about the difference between that modulation when he's angry and when he's in his baseline.
Yeah, and I do see him anger. Like that's the voice that comes easiest to me for him is his rage voice. Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that you can do with that is keeping this idea in cadence that he's thinking while he's speaking.
Yeah.
What you're going to change is the length of his rants.
Yeah.
So in his baseline voice, when he's not angry, you want his cadence to be 2, maybe 3 sentences long. Because if every time he speaks, he's in these huge rants, nobody's going to talk to him.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a very short story.
Yeah.
So keeping his dialogue controlled, especially because you've created this current conflict that he has with this self-awareness that he's not getting along with other people. So how you can actually show that to the readers is that he gets to a place where he starts ramping himself up, as long as he's not enraged, and he cuts himself off quickly. And he says like, oh, you know what, never mind. Never mind. Or we can talk about this later, right? Like he catches himself before he ramps up into this huge rant to show maybe he mumbles, I'm sorry, never mind. But keeping it at that 2 to 3 sentences in his cadence so that when he gets really angry, it becomes 7 sentences, 6 or 7 sentences. And then when he becomes vulnerable with Riley, he can actually even shorten from 2 to 3 sentences to 1 to 2 sentences to show that there's balance. And then balance ends up getting into pacing where there's more back and forth with her.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Okay.
That's awesome. Yeah, so now that we have that voice, and like if we were working with somebody else that isn't one of us, we would have been writing all of that in the chart. That chart gives me a starting, if I haven't written anything, it gives me a starting place for a scene. So I'm just going to glance at that voice before I go write a scene. I'm going to think like, what modulation is he in when it's the start of the scene? What modulation is he in at the end of the scene? Maybe the same one, but kind of where's his voice going? I'm going to glance at both of those, and then I'm going to write the scene. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to memorize them or like obsess over them or any of that. I'm just going to look at them to get them fresh in my head, and then I'm going to go write the scene. Now, if I'm editing an existing scene, I'm going to do the same thing. Be like, where does the modulation start? Where does the modulation end? Because that's the emotional journey that Mark's going to be on in that scene. And then I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to the words and the cadence, especially. And then as I edit, I'm going to look for those words and look for those cadence. And anywhere that doesn't match up with Mark's voice, and I'm going to need to change in that modulation. Yeah. All right. So that's one character.
That's one character.
That's one character. And I feel like let's hold Riley for another discussion because we've been talking for a while. And I'm really trying to keep our podcast under control and not go off topic and not talk about weird things.
So like if you're interested in doing this for your story, any one of your stories, whether it's something that you've already written and you're struggling with monomouth, or if it's something that you're trying to pick up after a couple of years and get back into, or you're starting something, we do these sessions in 90-minute blocks because Jeff will lead the conversation through the storyline and story development. And then I'll jump in and lead the discussion on voice so that you're leaving with a full cast of characters that you're ready to look at. But you've also thought through how the personalities of those characters will really help you build a plot and even more importantly, a connection with your readers.
And if you're a plotter like me, and you like write out the beats of the story before you do it, I actually find this kind of conversation to be helpful before I plot. If I have a general, like with Mark and Riley, I have a general idea of what I want in the story, where I want the story to go. I have probably 10 scenes written, but they're random short stories because that's how I come up with novels. Is I write short stories first, get the character voices in the short stories, and then I'm like, do I have characters here that I would hang out with for 50,000 words? And if I do, I can be like, okay, I've got a book here. So I put the characters in those short stories first, but then I want to have this conversation before I plot things out. Because as we talk about character voices, we're going to discover things about our characters that are going to add, like as we were talking about Mark and his beats, I'm like, oh, I need to have a moment where he, in the book, where he ruins at something he really wants, like a relationship with Riley, by blowing up. Like I need, and I don't have that moment right now. It's like I need to have that. Talking about his voice is changing how I was thinking about their meet cute when the two of them meet. So you're gonna get, if you're a plotter, you're gonna get ideas for your plot by talking out the character voices like this. Yeah, so just something to keep in mind of where and when you do this in your process.
Yeah. Excellent. And Jeff is really amazing as we talk about characters and the character juxtaposition from one another, saying things like that, where it's like, oh, we need a scene that does this. You need a scene that does that, right? Like being able to see, right, like how we connect different parts of the story.
Because your characters are going to transform in steps, right? Like character transformation from the beginning to the, if you think about your story as an emotional journey of character transformation, where the character's starting at one place and going to have all these emotional experiences until they end at this place of change. That's how we think about our story. Then you start thinking about like, okay, there's certain places, there's certain steps in that emotional journey that I have to have for my character to change, right? Like, so for Mark, I'm going to have a place where he feels justified and his old behavior is encouraged at the beginning of the story to show the reader why Mark behaves this way, right? I need to show that he's being rewarded. So I'm going to have to show some way that Mark gets rewarded. I'm going to have to show some place where Mark also shows his maturity in that, like, while he's being rewarded for this behavior, he really doesn't like it. And I need to have that. I've written that scene, but right now I have that scene at the beginning of my plot line. And I'm recognizing now, like, oh, I got to move that to later on in the plot, because I need to show Mark why Mark is the way he is before I start talking about why he wants to change. I need to have a scene where Mark is going to, again, blow up at the wrong person and really feel the pain of, if I think of my story as like, you know, challenge, choices, consequences, conflict, choices, consequences, I need to give some examples of Mark experiencing the consequences of making the wrong choice, right? Like so I need to have some moments where Mark really starts to screw up some relationships because he's deciding to be the wrong kind of person. And then I need to have the victorious moment where he decides to be the right kind of person and he gets the consequences that he wants, right? Like, and now you can kind of feel the emotional arc of Mark's character of like justified for the wrong reasons, but he feels good about himself until he recognizes, until he gets alone, and then he doesn't. And the reader can feel that pain of like, oh, this is a guy who wants to change that I want to stick around with. And then the reader's going to feel failure after failure after failure, where Mark is feeling failure after failure after failure. And you're really just going to want to be like, can you please just get your crap together so I can enjoy the story? And then the victory moment is all that much sweeter when Mark actually pulls his crap together. So yeah, just thinking about the arc of Mark's character and how that can drive your plot and how that can help you add scenes into what you're doing. All right. Thanks for this, Laura. This was fun. Thanks for hanging out with me to do this. Yeah. And we'll sign off.
I'm excited to come back and talk about Riley and the mystical voice.
Yeah, Riley and the mystical voice. And I actually think it's Riley that's going to hold the reader's attention. Mark is more for me.
Oh, we got another Mencken on our hands.
We get another Mencken. This is the first character Jeff wrote that was for Jeff and not for the reader. And Jeff's book paid for it. Mark is really for me. I like writing Mark, but Riley is a more empathetic character that you can actually like relate to and you want to see find healing. So yeah. So we'll talk about Riley on another episode at some point, sometime. All right. Any last words?
No.
Excellent. All right. We'll see y'all next week. Go to Dialogue Doctor. Sign up for all the stuff. Bye, guys.
Bye.